We'll move on to item 6, unfinished business, and the first item is approval of the 2012-13 school year budget and staffing changes, and Mr. Gorder has a lot of information for us.
Handouts. We'll start with the 11-12 summary of, actually it should be 12-13, apologize for that. A lot of handouts. Summary of revenues and expenditures. If you ignore that up there, you will see that nothing has changed from what we presented in June, and I think that's probably the most important thing. I will review a couple changes since we got our state aid estimate on July 1st as to the revenues. We'll take a look at them because they did change, and it is worth noting it was a positive change for the district. And that's one of the risks that you run when you put out a projection for the state aid. You got to have something. You can't not do anything. So you take what is the best. You look at it, you estimate it, because you folks have to make decisions. It's a little disappointing, at least for me, when we look at setting a budget that we get, and I've said this over and over, but I think it's worth emphasizing, to try to set a budget, and this process starts in November. We don't expect to have all the information in November, nor in January. But somewhere along the line, boards have to make financial decisions. Now, had the estimate on the state aid estimate held true, there's not a lot of options on July 1st for you guys to make decisions because the majority of the budget work has been completed, and if you're going to do anything drastic, we're past the layoff time, so we couldn't lay off staff members, so you don't have a lot of options. I'm not sure why, and it's always been July 1st. Certainly, I'm watching Cindy over here, but she's certainly, I think the state at least could have put out an estimate earlier, especially in the last 2 years when the stakes are so high. So, I guess I'm sort of apologizing for the numbers that were put out last June, but I'm very happy to report the numbers in July, so I think that offsets it a little bit. So we'll start with just the slight changes in the revenues, and obviously, our property tax, I think we showed about a 13% increase last month, and now we're looking at about a 5% increase. And then as we look at our state aid, last month we're looking at about actually a decrease of about 1.1 million, and now we're from the previous year, now we're looking at about a $313,000 decrease, or a loss of about 1.7%. That's really the big change when we're talking about the Citizens Guide as we look at the budget. Take a look at our fund grand totals. Again, it's worth emphasizing between Fund 10 and 27, and that's where the education takes place in the district. Reduce our cost by about $500,000. So I would open it up to any questions on, other than the change with the revenues and the non-salary before we go forward. I don't think, unless you have particular questions, that you want me to go back and review those numbers with you a second time tonight. If not, those are the numbers we'll be bringing forward to present at the annual meeting. With moving forward then?
Well, can you just repeat, I guess, what you just said, Greg? You're just asking with respect to the total revenue and expenses.
Yeah, total revenue and expenses that were presented last month for Fund 10,
okay.
Fund 27, Fund 38, 39, and Fund 50.
The numbers you presented us with before have stayed the same. The aid estimates that we got from the state have changed in our favor.
But that did change in the big scheme of things of how much we can or cannot spend.
Sure.
just change where the money's allocated.
Right.
And it actually helps the property tax, or the tax.
The tax levy, yeah. Okay. And I guess I will, we went over quite a bit of this in finance, so I have the advantage, as well as Deb and Gary, to have had a crack at this already. So if anybody else wants more time to look at it. But again, you know, it did come out, and I wanted to emphasize that when people see an increase in a levy, it has to be put in the context of the fact that our budget has actually been decreased, at least funds 10 and 27, which is the bulk of our budget, by close to $500,000. And any increase in the levy, which may be, at this point it looks around 4 to 5%, is the result of close to $500,000 less in state aid.
And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about equalized value.
Okay.
I put together a little bit of a sheet that kind of just shows you one other scenario. Had that scenario happened, what that might look like. So.
Okay, but just to repeat, we are essentially spending close to $500,000 less this year than we did last year.
In funds 10 and 27.
In funds 10 and 27, which is over 90%, 95% of our total budget.
Correct.
Yeah. And a lot of that was in salary, and fringes, which is a product largely of lower health insurance premiums.
If we look at where we were in January, I think we came in and I estimated approximately about $30,800,000 approximately, or actually $30,400,000, $500,000 approximately in total revenues and expenses. We actually picked up about $150,000 in additional revenues, which allowed us to spend a little bit more. But when we looked at that, we knew we had to cut about $1 million, and those cuts came from our insurance changes, from our staff, from switching from WEA and then going to HMO. And it's very important that we point out that we went from a very nice plan, which wasn't an HMO, to an HMO. And anytime you move from a point of service plan or a plan like that and go to an HMO where you're directed to one carrier or one medical organization like we are now, you're going to have a lot of savings. And then on top of that, throwing a deductible, there are even going to be more savings. So that's where the bulk of the savings came in.
All right.
I assume we'll be talking a little bit more about this at up-and-coming board retreat that we're having, a little bit more on the finance side of things. But I thought just kind of change it up here. Unless you had specific questions, I can go through it again, but I guess I'd like to know how you are comfortable or had any particular questions on the fund grant totals, on the salary, non-salary. Now, as we talked, our grants are down about $214,000, and they will continue to go down in the next couple of years, just because we're getting about 10% less than our flow-through IDEA federal grants and about 10% less in our Title I grants. So we will deal with those issues next year. This year we have enough carryover to help us work through those issues, but next year we'll have to deal with it.
And you did, I don't know if you're going to address it, you did have a handout on staffing changes.
Yep. And that's,
I guess it reflects that even apart from just salary and fringes, just the changes in staff also resulted in a net reduction.
Although we added a number of staff members, we also eliminated some positions, and the net gain was approximately a decrease of about $40,670, and that's estimated right now. We're not sure where those actual hirees will come in at, but try to look at putting them somewhere mid-level salary schedule and we looked at those things. So if you don't have any questions on the actual budgets themselves, let's look a little bit into the tax levy, because that's really what this meeting is about tonight. We'd like to look at the budget, you want to approve that, but along with that, the real decision you're making tonight is what you're going to bring to the annual meeting as far as the tax levy. So if we keep all of our expenditures and revenues as they're budgeted in June when we looked at them, what is the impact then on the tax levy? And we'll just go right to that and we'll move along to some of these other sheets, because most of the other sheets that we're seeing here really support what the work we've done at this point in time, or the tax levy that's going to get presented. So if we look at our tax levy, and we're looking at the bold, or highlighted the yellow area there for 07162012, and then we're comparing it to where we were in October of last year where we set the levy. So you kind of get a 2-year little snapshot here with the differences there. But overall, the total property tax fund levy is $11,582,423 as compared to the 1112. That's up approximately $500,000. And as we'll talk about, that's in direct relation to we lost approximately 70 students. And when you look at state aid, not only is a revenue limit set by the number of students, but our state aid is also determined by our third Friday and our second Friday counts that we have in September and January, and then they're added together to get an average. So, and we'll look at that sheet and just talk about that in a little bit. But then the next thing that we're looking at, once we have our property tax levy set, and because of the additional state aid that we received, or I shouldn't say we received, but because we didn't lose as much state aid as I had originally estimated, you can see that the tax levy, which would have been probably right around $9.40, or $940 per $100,000 of valuation, is now closer to that $878 per $100,000 of valuation, or an approximate $38 increase from the $840 that it was last year. And overall, when you take a look at this, the equalized values still need to factor into this at some point in time. Last year we saw equalized values, and this is the property wealth of the district. What is that increase or decrease from last year to this year? Last year we predicted no increase, and we actually received a 1.33% increase. This year again, conservatively I'm saying there's probably going to be no increase. Not sure what effect that some of the mining has had on the community yet, so we'll wait and see. Last year the city, I think, had a TIF district come off the books and end up on the tax roll, so that provided the relief that we're seeing here. We'll wait and see what the frac mining industry has had on overall equalized values. Now, although Toma saw an increase in the equalized values, statewide the trend was to see actually a decrease in equalized values. So when your equalized values go down and your tax levy stays the same, you're going to have a higher mill rate. If the equalized values go up and your property taxes stay the same, you're actually going to see a decrease in the mill rate. So those two play together. So now if we see about a 1.33% increase on our equalized values, then we're looking, instead of that $38 increase per 100,000, you could be looking at about a $26 increase per 100,000. And again, I'll just show you what that looks like real quickly on the state aid estimate. So overall, I'm looking at about a 4.51% increase on the tax levy for the school district. That's an increase of about $500,188, which would set our mill rate then at about $878 per $100,000 of valuation. So although it's an increase, as we talked about in finance, I feel a whole lot better coming in here tonight talking about a $38 increase versus a $100 increase that was projected. Questions?
This is based on one, our budget, which we expect to keep, on the aid estimate that we get from the state, and is that fairly reliable?
Well, none of this is reliable.
Okay.
But it's pretty reliable in the fact that there's three pieces we don't know yet. And that's kind of what makes this frustrating. The state gives us our state aid estimate. So we got that piece. The other piece that we need to know when we set our revenue limit is the number of students that will be attending next year. But we don't know that until the third Friday in September. But I can look back, and overall, other than last year when we had some transition going on at Fort McCoy, Toma's been slight to moderate growth. And since I've been here, that's what we projected. We've actually been able to look at it and say, you know what, we're just going to keep student numbers about the same. Unless there was 4K, we could do the addition of the 4K program. We added some students to that. So I'm looking back over time, looking forward a little bit, using the information that I'm getting, talking to different people, Mrs. Hardy, myself, and we're saying, enrollment's probably going to be about the same next year. 2 or 3 students isn't going to make a difference. I got my fingers crossed we're not going to see anything out at Fort McCoy, anything different. Actually, I'm hoping to pick up some of those students we lost last year because we were in that transition period. Our second Friday count actually was a little bit higher in January than it did in September, so maybe those students stick around and pick up a few more students. So we won't know that until the third Friday. We won't get our equalized values until the 1st of October. Those two numbers there are going to determine the tax levy and what's going to ultimately happen. Whether it's going to be a $38 increase, a $26 increase, and heaven forbid if we would have a decrease in our equalized values and that $38 could go up. Not sure that I anticipate that, but we don't know. And then finally, we'll get our final state aid allocation on October 15th. So all of this is guesswork up until we set the levy in October. But I think we're pretty close. We've done this now for many years here in Toma. I've done this for many years here in Toma now and in the previous district, and we're always pretty close. So I feel very, very good about what I'm presenting tonight. I don't think it's going to change a lot. It's that June meeting where we're predicting that I don't have any idea what that July 1st state aid estimate looks like. That is a little bit more disconcerting for me. It's just about impossible to predict.
Okay.
So we got 3 important dates coming up. Third Friday in September, October 1st for the equalized values, and then the final state aid estimate on October 15th. Any questions on the levy? So this is what we'll be bringing to the annual meeting if you approve this year. Now, the rest of the documents, as I said, are really just supporting documents. And if we take a look at just a little bit of history, here's 0910. In 910, we were at $7.81 or $781 per 100,000. 1011, we were at $802 per 100,000. And then, of course, last year we moved up to $840 per 100,000. And this year we're at $878 per 100,000. What does this look like if we would start to look at this trend, since we've been keeping records here in the district? Let's see if I can find that. Here are the mill rates since 1966. You can go back and take a look at them and see what's happening. And if we scroll down, we can take a look at the different graphs that we're seeing here. Try to increase that just a little bit, make it a little bit better. So the mill rate history, we're back in, I can't read that, but it looks like a long time ago. Back in the 1960s, this is 1970 here, so 1966 I believe is what it says. You can see where our mill rates were. They dropped. I can't tell you what happened in this time period, but something happened that the mill rate went down. And then they started spiking up through the early 90s. Then Tommy Thompson was the governor at that point in time and was committed to 2/3 funding to school districts, which allowed us to start dropping our mill rates all the way through. And then over time, they've gradually started to creep up a little bit. But from a historical perspective, we're still actually lower than what we've seen in over the past 40, 50 years now. Of course, we're not spending less money, okay? But to help with that a little bit, our equalized values have been increasing to kind of offset that spending. And what happened, I think, is a little bit here, and you can start to see it now, is this line right here. You kind of get lulled a little bit when your equalized values continue to increase and your spending increases, because it kind of keeps that mill rate lower. But what has happened after 2008, those equalized values flattened out very, very quickly. Spending continued to rise, so that's what has spiked. When you take a look at the mill rates on the top there, that's where you see the spike up there. I think that really kind of puts it in a pretty good historical perspective. When you take a look at that.
And Mr. Goodard, we discussed at finance was too that even though that tax levy, the amount we're levying has gone up, our overall budget in Fund 10, the biggest part of our budget, has actually been decreasing over the last few years. And we're just trying to make up that amount that we're losing from state aid is put then on our taxpayers locally.
Right. The previous year was I don't know if it's an anomaly why it went up, but there were certainly winners and losers, and we were a loser last year when it comes to the state aid fund. This year we're losing a little bit, but that's a direct result primarily from the loss of about 70 students. You look at the state aid fund. There is some comparables here that I think are worth taking for you to take some time. And I guess when you take a look at that, it tells us the percentage of where our money is being spent. And when we take a look at this, and across the state we're required to report money in certain areas, okay, in different codes, so that when you start comparing these to different school districts and the state, you can start to get at some kind of actual comparison, apples to apples. I don't know if it's 100% apples to apples, but it's about as close as you're going to get. We spend about 6.6% of our dollars on instruction. And when we start to look at the rest of the conference areas, they're in the 53.3%, 57.7%, 56.9%, 58.2%. And I think overall, if you take a look at those comparables where we are spending our dollars in comparison, the reason why we're at 60%, because that's where we're focusing our dollars. These are some new reports that the state is put together, and this just gives us a little bit different perspective as we look at comparables. Because in the past, and we'll look at those again too, we kind of compare, look at our mill rate. Our mill rate has typically always been about one of the 50 lowest in the state of Wisconsin, and that's a good thing. And I would assume that we're going to stay in that area, probably somewhere between 50 and 75 coming up here in the next year. But this is just another way to look at it, to say, not only do we have a low mill rate, but look at where we're focusing our dollars. 60% of that is going to education. So the dollars that we are getting from the public, we're focusing more of those dollars on instruction than any of our peers in the area. I think that's worth noting. And again, the revenue limit sheet, everything starts and ends here. Really actually a pretty simple worksheet we put together. You can see as we're looking at, we had a third Friday membership of, well actually our three-year rolling average was 3,149 students. This year there were 3,100, or we're estimating 3,128. But the big year was from 2010 to 2011. You can see we actually physically lost about 80 FTEs, but with the three-year rolling average, it's not looking too bad. This will be a concern in the next 2 years, and we'll talk about this, is that three-year rolling average is going to continue to drop, even as our enrollment stabilizes. That will create problems for us. And then again, once we get these numbers in here, you come up with your mill rate. And again, just for verification, you see the .008779118 or rounded to at $100,000 evaluation, $878. The other, just for here's the state aid estimate. Again, I'll boost this up a little bit, and it's interesting to kind of monkey around with these worksheets. Very complicated. I wouldn't even, to explain all of it, I wouldn't want to get there tonight. But bottom line is, we show 3,158 students. Last year at this time, we had 3,227 students, or about a 69 student difference. I plugged in 3,227 students into the formula just to see what it did. That would have increased our state aid by $452,442. So that 70 students had a significant impact on us in the dollars we lost. I think that the thing when we talk about state aid, in any normal year, this probably would have occurred to the degree that it occurred. I don't know. That funding formula, and this started actually 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, Governor Doyle decreased some of the amount of money that we were getting too. It's just those funny things when you start changing things. So it makes it a little bit harder to predict. But overall, in the state of Wisconsin, as reported in the various medias, there's about 360 school districts. A third of those actually increased their aid. 2/3 of the districts lost aid. I was estimating a 10% increase. There were many school districts that had a 15% decrease in state aid. Ours, again, was, I believe, about 4% or thereabouts. So why am I excited to be here tonight? We didn't get a 15% decrease in state aid. And we didn't get our 10%. We got 4% decrease. Is that great? No, but it's a whole lot better than some of the districts here in the state. And we know why, because the students were lost. That will even out over a period of years. Next year, you know, we will start getting aided on. We won't see that big decrease. We should have some stability there again in the state aid, if we're not losing students. So as we look at, again, the summary of the revenues and expenditures, and as we look at our 2012-2013 levy summary, this is what we are asking you, I guess, to approve or to consider approving to bring to the annual meeting on August 8th. 12th?
13th.
13th, yeah. Monday, it's a Monday.
Monday, August 13th.
So in terms of actual numbers that we're approving for this budget, we could be looking at the summary of revenue and expenditures. That has all the different funds. And the total fund amount for all funds is $34,841,575. That's what I'm reading on in the big budget.
Just a reminder tonight, you're not approving anything other than moving the budget to the annual meeting.
Okay.
The annual meeting is where everything will be approved, and then, of course, there will be changes that we talked about in the final levy will be set by the board on or before, I believe, November 5th. So you will get, after the annual meeting, you will still get one other crack at the budget.
I make a motion, we pass this on to the annual meeting.
So that's the motion, approval of this proposed budget for consideration at the annual meeting? Okay. Is that what you're moving?
You want to check the motion for motion? that last year was a motion was made to approve the proposed 2011-12 district budget with a total property tax levy of $11,318,200 to the annual meeting.
Okay. So if we could take that and
Yeah, you would be...
amend it with our numbers.
Yeah, a motion, your motion would be, a motion was made to approve the proposed 2012-13 district budget with a total property tax levy of $11,582,423 to be presented at the August 13th annual meeting.
Do you want to make that motion, Pam?
I did.
Okay, so we have a, is there a second?
I can second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to bring forward the proposed 2012-2013 budget with a proposed levy of $11,582,423 for consideration at the August 13th annual meeting. Is there any further discussion or any other questions about this budget or levy? Hearing no other discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So the motion carries, and we will bring forward this budget and that proposed levy to the August 13th annual meeting. Is there anything else on that, Greg? Okay.